Hey there. Going to take a look at the low light or high ISO performance of the A7 IV and compare that with the FX3. I'm really curious to see how the A7 IV holds up. The main difference between these two cameras is the sensor. The A7 IV is a 33 megapixel sensor and the FX3 has a 12 megapixel sensor. And for all intents and purposes, the FX3 does have a dual base ISO, even though Sony doesn't, officially say that. Everyone pretty much has accepted that as true. And the FX6, which has the same sensor, it does have it. So I know they're slightly different cameras, but I'm going to take a look at the ISO performance and see how the A7 IV and the FX3 do as they go up. Generally, most people will say that having lower megapixels means that the pixels are larger and therefore the low light capabilities are better. So I'm really curious to see how this does. Now for this setting here, we have the FX3 with the 16 to 35 G master, and over here we have the A7 IV with the 24 to 70 G master. And these are the two lenses that I have that are as close as I can to each other. They're both set at 28 millimeters. For all the other settings, they're going to be as close as I can to each other. Their white balances are set at the same. We're shooting XAVC SI in 4K, 24 frames a second. Shutter speed is 1/50. And what we're going to be doing is taking the key light down. I'm using one light here above me, and I'm going to be lowering that. And at the same time, I will be raising the ISO to make sure the exposure stays the same. Now we're shooting S-Log3, so I'm aiming for a plus 1.3 on the exposure meter. And exposure meter, is that a thing? I forget what it's called, EV. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to do that and go through and we'll take a look and see how they do. All right, so I think there's some pretty interesting results there, and I apologize if the images weren't exactly the same. I did my best to match them without messing with them too much, and the biggest thing really was to look at the noise levels and the detail level and that kind of stuff. So if the colors were a little bit off, I'm sorry, I did my best, but that was not the key here, and I want to do a more of a side-by-side with image quality and sharpness and all that kind of stuff another time between these two cameras, but really focusing on low light and noise in this test. Now, in terms of base ISOs, the A7 IV has a base ISO in S-Log3 of 800, and some people are reporting that it has a second base ISO of 3200. Now, the A7S3 and FX3 have a base ISO in S-Log3 of 640 and 12,800. Now, I didn't notice as much of a cleaning up going from on the A7IV from 2,500 to 3,200 as I did in the FX3 going from 10,000 to 12,800. So I don't know if there actually is a second base ISO of the A7IV, but there is a little bit of cleaning up there, and I think it's something to notice, and it's very, very clear on the FX3 when you go from 10,000 to 12,800. Now, keep that in mind because I think overall the A7IV looked a lot cleaner in terms of noise across the board, except for a couple situations, and I want to talk about those, but I was really blown away by it. And I don't know if that's just because of the higher megapixel sensor and the oversampling where you might doing something to lower the noise level, but when you get from 3,200 up to 12,800, I think the A7IV definitely does a better job. And I don't know if it's that because of that second base ISO or whatever, but most people that are shooting on the FX3 or A7S3, you know that from 3,200 until you get to that second base ISO of 12,800, it can get pretty noisy. And you could definitely see that in this test. So a lot of people know that if you're in that 3,200, 6,400 or higher range, it's better to actually go up to 12,800 and then either use ND filters or the aperture to lower the exposure, and that way you can lower the amount of noise. Now, if you're really needing high ISO, really low light stuff, I think the FX3 is going to be better. So if you're 12,800 or 16,000, I think I could definitely see there that the FX3 is going to be cleaner. Once you get to 20,000 or 25,600 and above, I think they're pretty similar. So I think you need to really understand, your tool and understand where you are in your ISO range and what camera might be the best thing for you. So if you find yourself in certain situations where you need 12,800, 16,000, then the FX3 is your camera. And I think I was really surprised by how clean the image looked on the A7IV. I'm really happy with it so far. Again, this is a very simple low light test. This would probably be a lot more value in other situations, shooting outside in real world. But frankly, I don't shoot a lot of low light outside because generally when I'm shooting outside, it's during the day. So I figured this is a great way to try to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek into the low light performance of the A7IV. Very, very impressed. And I think there'll be more testing, but I just want to put this out there. So in case you're curious about it, you could take a look. If you found this helpful or you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting subscribe. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.